Everybody who is fascinated with the Roman Empire would like to know why it fell. How could such an advanced civilization fall, and so relatively quickly, when it had stood before for more than 1,000 years? I already made a few videos investigating many possible reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire, summarizing the most important points, because even though we wished this was the case, the Roman Empire did not fall because of one single big reason. It was a really complex interplay of several different reasons that took place simultaneously. From intrinsical problems that led to constant civil wars, to economical problems, to military problems, to a huge influx of Germanic invaders, to so many other reasons why the empire fell. But one reason that I have not yet talked about in detail, but only mentioned briefly as an additional factor, was population decline. So by how much did the population of the Roman Empire decline in later centuries? Did it decline at all? And if yes, why? And if it did, how important of a factor was population decline of the Roman people in the grand scheme of things? When we look at the extraordinary calamities that came over the Western Roman Empire after that fateful year of 406 AD, we are astounded as to how the Germanic invaders could be so successful in overrunning the various provinces of the Western Roman Empire. Had the Romans not once defeated the whole known world? Was it not the Romans who once had the most powerful army, the mighty legions that were known to subjugate even the fiercest enemy tribes? And now in the 5th century, it appears that suddenly the old legions were weak and frail. Had their numbers maybe dwindled? Was it maybe that far fewer of them existed compared to the early empire? If we look at the extraordinary pace with which the Roman Empire fell apart, basically disintegrating in the time span of not even a whole human life, whereas it had stood firm for centuries before, we cannot help but wonder if maybe there were just fewer Romans in the 5th century AD than in the 1st or 2nd centuries AD. As you can imagine, reconstructing the population of the Roman Empire over the course of the centuries is incredibly difficult, because population counts were not carried out regularly, and so there is not a lot of data to go by in the later centuries of the Roman Empire. And what at first also appears incredibly difficult, at least for most of us, is programming. Wow, what a transition, Maiorian would be proud. But bear with me here, because this might interest you even as a fan of Roman history. Why? Pretty simple, because there is a way to learn programming the easy and fun way, and that might earn you some denarii or even some solidi. According to Stack Overflow, the median salary for back-end developers in the US in 2023 was over $100,000 per year, median. And as a programmer, you can normally work remotely from home, so that means you can watch videos about the late Roman Empire on the side. And who wouldn't like that? So the people at boot.dev believe that the smartest way to learn programming is to make sure you're never bored. You will earn experience points like in an RPG game, unlock achievements and complete quests, and you can even ascend the ranks of a global leaderboard, basically like a real-life game. But the reward being that you can earn serious money with your newly learned skills. Even old Rikima wouldn't say no to that. The platform is designed to get you writing a lot of code, because getting your hands on the keyboard and shipping projects is the only way to really learn programming. You will learn back-end web development from start to finish in the Python and Go programming languages. Boot Dev is completely online, self-paced, and it really feels like a captivating RPG game, complete with very motivating achievements every time you ascend a level. If you have any questions, the boot.dev Discord community is very active and there to help if you ever get stuck on your coding challenges. I tried it out myself, of course, and I have to say it's surprisingly fun and easy to learn, and that has to mean something coming from me as a total programming noob. So click the link in the description box and use my code Maiorianus to get 25% off your first payment for boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or first year, depending on the subscription you choose. So learn programming with boot.dev and put your newly learned skills to good use. So back to the population of the Roman Empire. Exact numbers are, as you no doubt can imagine, impossible to obtain, but there are some very good estimates as to how many people lived in the Roman Empire during the time of Augustus. The 19th century historian Carl Julius Beloch was the first to estimate the population of the Roman Empire based on numbers he reconstructed from the population census under Augustus in combination with contemporary sources and average population growth statistics. Beloch arrived at a number of 54 million people that lived in the Roman Empire in 14 AD in the later reign of the Emperor Augustus. Others arrive at numbers ranging from a lower bound of 45 million to an upper bound of even 120 million people during that time. The most accepted figures, and that is still valid today, range from about 60 to 75 million people. 6 to 7 million of those would have lived in Italy and 1 million in the city of Rome itself. So the population density of Italy was extremely high compared to, for instance, Britannia. Kyle Harper estimated a figure of 60 million people during the reign of Augustus in his 2017 book Climate, Disease and the End of an Empire. In there, we can find other highly interesting numbers. Harper suggested an average population growth of 0.1% per year until the Antonine Plague in the mid-160s AD. So that would put the peak of the empire's population at 75 million in 165 AD. Basically, all scholars agree that this was the peak of the population of the empire, because as we know, that is when things already seriously started going wrong for the Romans. Starting in 165, a brutal virus, thought to have been a form of smallpox, began spreading in the entire Roman Empire, killing millions of people. Estimates vary again quite drastically, but the most accepted number is that about 10% of the population of the Roman Empire died. So if we say that 75 million people lived in the empire in 165 AD before the catastrophe began, a few decades later the empire was down to 67.5 million. That is quite a massive drop. We know that the severity of the disease varied greatly from region to region. Some regions were especially brutally hit, and we know for instance that Marcus Aurelius organized the resettlement of Germanic people into Gaul on a massive scale in order to repopulate areas that were hit especially hard and where some cities had almost become ghost towns. It is of course no coincidence that the Roman army also suffered greatly in that time. About 500 to 600,000 men served in the Roman army during those days, and if 10% died, that meant 50 to 60,000 dead legionaries, a massive hit, which, as we know, resulted in the first successful invasions of Germanic tribes into Roman territory, which could only be driven back under great difficulties, a foreshadowing of things to come. It is also no coincidence that the Roman Empire never again reached the same technological innovation, the same agricultural output, the same output of gold and silver from its mines, the same iron ore smelting activity and other metrics as it did during the Pax Romana of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. And as we know, things did not get better for the Roman Empire. In the 250s AD, not even a century later, another pandemic hit the empire, the Cyprian plague. We don't know much about that disease, but modern virologists think that it might have been some form of Ebola-like virus. The death toll is unknown, but we know that it must have also been absolutely brutal. The population of Alexandria, for instance, was said to have been severely reduced by that disease, from around 500,000 people down to 190,000. In Rome, 5,000 people were said to have been dying per day at the outbreak of the disease. So while we don't have exact numbers, we can again assume that a death toll of 10% does not seem to be completely unreasonable for the entire empire. Because remember, the highly densely populated cities such as Alexandria or Rome were of course much more affected than the areas in the more remote countryside of Gaul or Britain. It is here too no coincidence that immediately during and after that pandemic, huge barbarian invasions and massive civil wars occurred. Pandemics always destabilize societies and cause wars, and so it is absolutely a cause of the plague that the empire almost fell during the crisis of the 3rd century. It just barely survived out of sheer luck, because there were emperors like Gallienus, Claudius Gothicus, Aurelian, Probus, and such capable figures that turned the tide for the empire. Also, the 2 brutal pandemics resulted in the people seeking consolation from the harsh reality in new faiths, and thus the rise of Christianity is in many ways a result of the Antonine and Cyprian plagues. There is also another effect that we must be aware of. The big cities of the empire were always a net population drain, meaning that even when no big pandemics were raging, more people died per year in Rome or Alexandria than were born. Because a high population density always meant a higher mortality rate in those days of constant diseases, infections, and other dangers. So the rural areas of the empire always needed to provide new Romans. However, we of course can assume that the 2 plagues had a lasting effect on the long-term population growth of the empire. It is super difficult to obtain reasonable numbers, but the historian J.C. Russell estimated in 1958 that the population of the empire in 350 AD was only 83.7% of the population in 1 AD. So if we assume 60 million inhabitants in the time of Augustus and 75 million during the peak in the mid-2nd century AD, we would have only 50 million people in the Roman Empire in 350 AD. That is only 2/3 of the peak population in the times of Hadrian or Antoninus Pius, which is absolutely massive. Of course, this number certainly also has a high error range, but nonetheless, it is not completely unreasonable. To make this even more brutal, Russell estimated that while the population of the Roman Empire had declined, the population of the Germanic nations, meanwhile, across the Limes border, had actually increased. He estimated that in 350 AD, 8.3 million people lived beyond the borders of the Roman Empire in Europe, while it was only 7.9 million in 1 AD. So while the population of the Roman Empire had decreased by 16.3%, the population of the Germanic people had increased by 5% in 350 compared to 1 AD. This explains why Germanic incursions occurred much more frequently in the 300s and apparently more easily, and of course much more so in the 400s AD, as compared to the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, before the big pandemics hit. Of course, we can assume that the numbers did not improve a lot in the 5th century. If anything, we can assume that in 450 AD, the population of the empire remained at best constant, while the population of the Germanics probably increased again. But at worst, the population of the empire might have declined again by a few percent in that 100-year time span, while the population of the Germanic tribes might have increased again by a few percent, so therefore shifting the numerical advantage even more in favor of the Germanic tribes. And please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or YouTube membership, because I really need your help in order to be able to continue this work on late Roman history. Without your support, I don't know how much longer I can continue this channel, because as you can imagine, the YouTube algorithm does not exactly push a niche topic such as late Roman history. Thank you very much. And so we understand why, starting already in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, Rome had to rely more and more on foederati, and so had to employ more and more Germanic people as federate soldiers in the Roman army. If you have in 400 AD only about 2/3 of the Roman population as in 160 AD, well, then you will try to make up for that difference with foreign soldiers. And so even though the population of the empire was lower, you still ended up with about the same number of soldiers. Indeed, in the 300s, before the insane civil wars of the late 300s, the combined Eastern and Western Roman army was still about 500 to 600,000 men strong, the same size as in the early empire. However, it consisted of much more foederati, with, as we know, not ideal consequences for the Roman Empire, since those foederati would often, not always, but often, be not quite as faithful to the Roman Empire as a native Roman. Oftentimes, they would show a higher allegiance to their tribes, and there would be, of course, a lot of feuds between the different Germanic tribes, creating all kinds of problems. It becomes thus increasingly clear that while the population decline of the Roman Empire did not destroy the Roman Empire, as the Romans intelligently filled up the missing Romans with people of Germanic origin, it did create massive problems for the Imperium Romanum. A lower agricultural output, a lower industrial output, lower innovation, and a higher barbarization and intrusion of Germanics into the ranks of the Roman army, but also into the Roman population. It is no wonder that the biggest shift in Roman customs, such as clothing and armor, occurred in the 3rd and 4th centuries, because the massive influx of Germanics, of course, also brought with them many of their customs and clothing. Therefore, traditional Roman clothing fell out of use in those times. A Roman from the year 1 AD would not have even recognized a Roman from the year 400 AD as a Roman. I talked in detail about the clothing of the late Romans in this video here. So demographics and population declines certainly did play a part in the fall of the Roman Empire. It might not have been the main reason, but in my opinion, it does rank very high on the list of reasons why the empire fell. Of course, the intrinsic systemic problems, the lack of a succession system, the debasement of the currency, the massive cost of the army, the increased difficulty in finding new recruits, the splitting of the empire, the migrations of the Germanic people, and so many other reasons played a huge role as well. But the population decline of the Roman Empire certainly should not be underestimated as a very big reason for why the Imperium Romanum fell. And this is, by the way, a problem that we can see in our modern times as well. The societies which have a declining population are normally the ones that are stagnating regarding industrial and economic growth, and sometimes also regarding technological innovation. Especially many highly developed countries suffer from a population decline. Countries such as South Korea are expected to lose more than a third of their population until the year 2100. Japan and China are also very high up on the list of population collapse countries, and so are many nations of Europe. And exactly as in Roman times, this brings massive societal and economic shifts with it. Long term, it is estimated that the human population of planet Earth will peak around the year 2100 at around 10 to 11 billion, and then will probably begin to decline. So we have the same problems now that the Romans had, and it didn't end well for them. It is no wonder that Emperor Majorian himself, in one of his laws, tried to increase the fertility of Roman women by abolishing religious chastity. Modern societies also think of ways to increase fertility, for instance, monetary incentives. Again, an instance where we can see that history might not necessarily repeat, but it sure does once again rhyme a lot more than we would like. But I have the hope that we are going to learn from the Romans. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. It is thanks to the amazing Patreons and YouTube members of this channel that I can continue making videos about the late Roman Empire. And I would especially like to thank our new Sol Invictus supporter, Joa. Joa, thank you so much for supporting this channel in the most generous way possible. But we also have a new Augustus member, Archie Williams. Thank you so much, Archie Williams, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. And we also have a new Caesar supporter, namely Danny Smith. Thank you so much, Danny Smith, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. And I want to thank each and everyone who is supporting this channel in any form. And if you want to learn more about 10 reasons why the Roman Empire fell, you can watch the video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about 10 other reasons why the empire fell, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.